Today, I don't want to belabor a lot. I want to get right into the ministry that Brother Shawn is going to bring to us today. Shawn and Nisa, they're just precious people of God, and they've been friends of ours. Shawn, I've been knowing Shawn for a long time, many years, back in the early 2000s when we were youth pastor, and I connected with Shawn, and I kind of reconnected. Life happened. We moved off to Texas and then ended up coming back. And, you just kind of lose connection with people. But I ended up reconnecting with Shawn through one of my favorite hobbies, which is deer hunting. I was in Thornton, Arkansas, of all places, a handful of years back. And I'd gotten into a new lease down there. And I'd killed a deer, and I was looking for a processor. I was staying for the week, and so I really didn't want to mess with it. I was just going to send it to the processor. So I started Googling, looking around for a processor, and I come to find one. Like, there's a processor right here. Well, come to find out, it's Shawn and Nisa that's running this processing plant. So we ended up reconnecting, and I really enjoyed that because I got to deer hunt. I would pull up and kick my deer off the tailgate. They would clean it, and I get to go hunting again. So that worked out really well for me, but we got to reconnect during that time. And I know over the years, especially the past decade or so, a little more, Shawn has been through so much, and he's gone through some extreme loss in his life, and I knew that, and I felt like the Lord told me at one point, I want you to have Shawn come in. I want you to have Shawn share his testimony. And you know how life happens, and you get busy, and you kind of go from one day to the next, and a week turns into a month, and it just keeps going on and on. Well, the Holy Spirit kept bringing it back to my attention. He kept pricking my heart. I want you to have Shawn to come. I want you to have Shawn to come. I want him to come, and I want him to share his testimony. So finally, I reached back out to Shawn. I said, Shawn, the Lord's dealing with my heart about that. I want you to come, and I want you to share your testimony if you're open to that. Because what he's going to share today is raw, it's real, he's opening his heart up to our church today and to all of those who are going to watch this online later. And he's been gracious enough to say yes and to share his testimony with us today about loss and about pulling through some of that loss and processing through it. And I feel like this is such an important message for the people of God to hear. So without further ado, I want you to welcome Shawn Watkins as he comes and joins me at the pulpit this morning. Love you, buddy. I love you, man. All right. Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate that worship team. That was good. Amen. This morning, that worship was good. I feel the Lord in the house today, and I'm excited about all that God's going to do. And of course, we've already got one run through with the first service, so I know that was powerful, wasn't it? I felt good about it, and I know that the Lord is touching some lives. And you might be in this place today, and you're suffering through some loss, or you might watch online or later on, or you may be somebody here that just knows somebody who's suffered through some loss. And again, that could be the loss of a loved one, that could be the loss of a marriage, the loss of a job. There's various forms of loss that people can go through. But you may be in this place today, and you say, well, if I'm honest, it's not a scar yet. We go through, we get wounded in life, and when the Lord heals it, sometimes it leaves a scar that we share that testimony. But I'm in 100% belief and assurance in my soul that there are people in this room that have an open wound. It's just not healed yet. There's people that are going to watch this online, and I encourage you guys that are here. This may hit with you. This may not be where you're at in this season of life, but I encourage you, if you know somebody, after we get out of here today, go online, grab that link to the online streaming, and it'll be on YouTube and everything else later. Take that, send it to somebody, and let it minister to them. Shawn, thank you so much for being with us today. I love you and Nisa, and I appreciate you guys so much. And I've been knowing you for a long time, but I want you to take just a few moments and just kind of tell the people who is Shawn and Nisa, and what are you guys up to nowadays?
Well, I'm Shawn Watkins. I was born and raised in the big town of Falk, Arkansas.
How many of y'all, I know we got one other guy from Falk, Arkansas right there. I mean, two, we got a couple. We got Falk people in the house today. Come on. Awesome. How many of y'all know, let me see your hand, how many of y'all know where Falk is at? Wow, okay, y'all on the map, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
Everybody's heard of the Falk Monster. So
what's it called?
The Legend of Boggy Creek.
The Legend of Boggy Creek. How many of y'all ever saw that movie? Be honest. They made a movie about your hometown.
It was required watching when we were growing up. Chris and I have seen it hundreds of times.
Was your family members in that movie? Did you have family members?
No, but I knew everybody in it.
Of course you did.
But yeah, it was yeah, the opening scene, the guys, in the P-row, we used to duck hunt together, Troy Russian.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's crazy.
But it's a small world, you know, and especially in the Assembly of God, I've come to know, this morning, we've run into person after person we've known growing up. But I grew up in Falk, Arkansas. My grandfather on my dad's side was a holiness preacher and a farmer down at Garland Farms. He pastored a church of about 8 people, Concord Holiness Church. And then my grandfather on my mother's side was a contractor, and he built all the Roadrunner convenience stores for 17 years. That's what his #1 job was. And so we grew up with kind of a varied background. Nisa and I, we've been in ministry. Her first husband died when she was 30 years old due to kidney failure here in Hot Springs at the dialysis part of the hospital. And he was pastoring at Louisville at the time. And then we wound up getting married in 2011.
Yeah, there you go. You almost messed up there, didn't you?
I did. Why did I step off in that? But we...
She was quick to correct.
But we've been married for almost 13 years now, and we've seen a lot of life in the last 13 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're foster parents for Compact. We've been doing that for almost 10 years, 12 years, somewhere along in there. We enjoy that. We've had, I don't know how many boys through our home in the last that bit of time, but the whole the whole plan for the meat processing is so that they can learn a trade. We have a farm, 112 acres there in Thornton, and we teach them. We try to teach them skills and trades. So when they age out of foster care, they have something they can get into. Mm-hmm. It's not just about helping the boys to grow up. It's helping them to be productive members of society as well.
Mm-hmm. How many of y'all know how important that is? Come on, we got a bunch of people involved in that whole process that are here in this building this morning. What you guys are doing is amazing work, because that's a very vulnerable time for those kids when they age out and everything. And so, man, blessings on you, brother. Thank you guys for what you're doing for the kingdom, and I just admire you a whole lot for what you're doing now, and for also what you've been through. And I know we've had plenty of time to talk about it and everything, but I'd like for you just to take a few moments and just share some of your story of loss. I know there's a couple of things that really have stuck out to me as we were having dinner with them on Friday night and just talking about the service today and what this was going to look like. And there's been various forms of loss that you have endured and walked through, but there were 2 scenarios that I felt like would be great to share with the people today, encourage and help somebody in the place who's walking through it. And that was the fact that a number of years ago you walked through a divorce, and then sometime after that, I believe 7 years after that, the loss of your 21-year-old daughter Taylor in a tragic car accident. Would you just take a moment and just begin to share a little bit of that story?
Well, after serving almost 11 years in full-time ministry, I wound up going through a divorce. And going through a divorce as a pastor and a preacher, you're kind of in a bubble. Everybody can see what you're doing. Everybody can see your life. Everybody's watching everything. And Satan has a way of getting into your life and just telling you everything you think you know is over. Everybody ever been there? Mm-hmm. I got to the point to where I was defeated, living in complete defeat, you know, because I didn't feel like I was effective for the kingdom anymore. Didn't feel like God could use me. Didn't feel like it was making a difference. And got to the point to where on one Sunday morning I was sitting on a lawnmower in my front yard watching people drive to church because I was too embarrassed to go to church myself. I didn't want everybody to look at me and say, "Oh, poor Shawn, you know, all that mess." I didn't want that. And so I didn't go to church that Sunday morning, and I was letting that Satan get in my head. Anybody ever let him get in your head like that?
Oh, yeah.
He'll start playing tricks on you, start getting you distracted, getting your mind where it shouldn't be. And that particular Sunday morning, I was sitting there and I was letting Satan get in my head. And he was making me contemplate things I'd never contemplated before in my life. And as people were driving past going to church, I was right in the middle of the town I lived in, and I was 3 blocks from the church where I'd youth pastored for 4.5 years. Mm. And so when a young lady drove by, I waved at her, and she kept driving. But what she didn't know is she started praying for me. Well, the Lord laid on her heart, said, hey, call Brandy and tell her to go hang out with Shawn. So she called Brandy, and Brandy showed up at my house. And I said, girl, what are you doing here? She said, Mom said you needed somebody to hang out with you today, so here I am. Well, my mind immediately transferred, because this was one of my youth students from several years before. And my mind immediately pulled away from the funk that it was in and got back on to something positive. I said, well, let's go get some breakfast. And at that point, I was out of that funk. And it didn't come back to me like that again. But, you know, it's one of those times where Satan can get in our heads, and he can take one little thought and he'll start twisting it and spiraling it down to where he's got us in a hole. And then, fast forward to 2017, Taylor was working at Compact. She's like Brother Tommy said, she was 21 years old. She was going to school at Henderson to get her psychology degree, and then she was working over there as a CNA because she already had her CNA license. And she was doing what she could do, you know, and she'd come home, went to church with me on Sunday, and was driving back on Monday, the time of time change. And she hydroplaned in front of a dump truck. And the Lord took her home. My loss with Taylor is completely and totally different than any type of loss I've ever experienced in my life. When you lose a child like that suddenly, with the moment that mine and the state trooper's eyes met, I knew exactly what he was fixing to tell me. And he had actually worked at a funeral home when I youth pastored, and we had done funeral services together. And so I knew him before he'd even become a state trooper. But he was a friend of mine, and it was one of them deals where we knew. It was just understood. And so we went through that, and we lived that out. And I look back on that situation of Taylor losing and passing, and how much hurt I went through. I got to the point in my life where being a pastor, people would call me and say, oh, brother, I'm praying for you, I'm praying for you, I'm praying for you. And what I would tell them was, thank you, because I can't pray for myself. I could not sit down and pray or just ask the Lord, hey, Lord, help me through today. What I said was, God, why did you allow this to happen? The only prayer that would come out of my mouth, or that I could even utter, was why? Why did it happen? Why did you take Taylor away from me? Why? This went for 5 weeks. 5 weeks of not being able to pray. I felt so isolated from God. I felt so distant from him. And when we got to the point to where that we were at a situation in our life where I was hurting. Got to the week of Easter on a Tuesday evening, and a gentleman from a small church outside of El Dorado called me, and he said, hey, could you fill in for us this Sunday? And I said, well, brother, I don't know. I was hesitant at first, but then I told him, yeah, I'll do it, because it was Tuesday night before Easter Sunday. Now, talking about waiting to the last minute to get somebody to preach on Easter Sunday, they were. And I thought, man, I must be the last resort for this church. But I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I said, but I need to tell you before I come and preach for you, there's been some changes in my life. I said, well, I had a daughter killed in a car accident. He said, no kidding, buddy. I said, yeah, she was in a car accident. She hydroplaned in front of a dump truck up on Highway 9. He asked me a really strange question next. He said, well, you know who owned the trucking company? Or you know the name of the trucking company? And I said, yes, sir, I did. And I told him the name, and he goes, well, they attend our church here. Is that going to be a problem for you? Now, my thought was, well, ain't that something? That God would bring that back around. But then I thought about it in my heart, and I said, you know, I feel like that man was just trying to make a living, just like I am. And when I said that, something in my heart began to heal. It began to express forgiveness towards what the situation was and what had happened. Well, fast forward to Saturday morning, I get up and I start writing my sermon for that, or trying to write my sermon for tomorrow, for Easter Sunday. And I said, Lord, give me something. I was excited. I was thinking, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. 7 o'clock in the morning, I started riding. Nisa had an activity at the church. She got all the animals and carried them to a petting zoo they were doing for the Easter outreach they were having at our church in Camden. And I stayed home. She stayed gone all day long. And about 4 o'clock that afternoon, I just wadded everything up and threw it on the ground. I said, God, if you don't give me something today, then I'll never get behind a pulpit again. And I got up and I started walking around the outside of the house. And I was praying, God, this is not right. You know, I can't feel your presence. I don't know that anything I've ever taught or believed is even real anymore. I'm done with this. I began to doubt everything I'd known, everything that I'd believed, everything that I'd trusted, everything that I felt to be real. Now remember, I served in full-time youth ministry for over 11 years. And now I'm doubting everything that I taught. Because Satan had got a hold of my heart and he had just kind of twisted everything up. And that distance that I had between me and God has really become so real to me that I can't hear his voice no more. He's not there. It's not like it was. Was I imagining all that before? All of these thoughts come into my mind. And as I began to walk around the outside of my house, the Lord spoke to me and he said, I felt the exact same way you did when I lost my son on the cross. I felt every emotion. I've went through every pit of anger. All the emotions that you've went through, I went through them when I lost my son on the cross. And as I walked back in the house and I wrote that sermon out just as fast as I could write. And it was one of those things where God had downloaded into me his emotions and what he had felt and how we had reacted. And I could relate to him at that moment. And it brought healing to me. I got up the next morning and I preached that sermon. I don't know that I ever looked up from my notes, but I delivered that sermon to that church. And Nisa said there wasn't a dry eye in the house. But when the young lady got up to sing the special, she sang the song that was sang at my daughter's graveside, that you're a good, good father. And when she sang that song, it just broke me because the last time I'd heard it was at the graveside of Taylor's when we put her in the ground. So with that being said, God has a lot of ways we can deal with our emotions. But that brought healing to me at that moment. Now, healing comes in all kinds of different ways. We deal and grow, and everyone deals with their emotions differently. And what might have worked for me may not have worked for anybody else.
So I want to back up just a little bit there. That's an extreme amount of loss, and that hits a person at their core. The loss of your marriage, and then your daughter, and like you said, that's kind of a next level. I don't know of any greater level of pain than that, to lose a child, and in the fashion that you lost Taylor. And I know when we were talking about all this, you talked about a couple that really ministered to you during that season. And I want to talk a little bit and just encourage the people how to deal with that. Like if you know someone that's going through loss like this at some extreme level, I think the church a lot of times is guilty of swinging to one extreme or the other. They either are aloof and they don't know what to do. It's not that they don't love the people. It's not that they don't care. It's just that they back away from it because they really don't know how to navigate the moment. And then there's other people on the other side of the spectrum that they've got all the steps that you need to do to be healed. They're going to, start spouting off every scripture that they know to you and everything. And really, neither one of those are right. There's got to be something else. And I know you talked about Greg and Megan and how they helped you out. I want you to talk a little bit about, how, as the church, how do we minister to somebody who has gone through extreme loss?
Wow. Sometimes the best thing to do is just be there and not say a word. Mm-hmm. Brother Greg, as he was mentioning, Brother Greg Sanders, he pastors in Cabot at the assembly now, but he was my pastor in Camden. When he found out, he just showed up. He was just there. He sat down on the couch. Megan got her up, and she was busy her and Nisa was in the kitchen cleaning, wiping down counters, whatever needed to be done, they were doing it. And just everybody handled it differently. I'd been sitting there for about an hour or so with Greg in there, and I said, well, I got to go get some chicken feed or some goat feed or something. And he said,
if Falk didn't make you country, you just did by saying, he had to go get some goat feed. Yeah. We're dealing with a true country boy right here this morning.
We got a lot of goats and cows and chickens and pigs, but we had to go get the feed, and so we got up and went and got the feed, and he said, I'll drive you. We got in his truck. He drove me to the feed store, got the feed, and turned around and drove back home. Somewhere in amongst that, I said, I want you to do the service for Taylor. And we visited, back and forth for a couple of days, but Greg would always just wait for me to say something, and he would respond. He never tried to start a conversation. He never tried to initiate it. He was right beside me every time I turned around. He was real close. And, and today I commend him for the way he helped me through that. We talked about it later, and he said, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say nothing at all. And there was no way to comfort. There was no way to comfort in those situations. There's ways not to. When you come up and you try to tell somebody, well, God's going to see you through this. Okay. We don't want to hear that. And nobody wants to hear that. God's got them. God's got them. That's not what they're trying to hear. What they want to hear is, I'm praying for you. That means more than anything else. Is just knowing that somebody has got their back. Because I'll be honest with you, for 5 weeks, I couldn't pray for myself at all. Not one time. And I didn't have any spiritual strength. So the only strength that I got was with other people praying for me. And don't just say you're going to pray for them. Pray for them. Actually pray. And then there was a second part to that question. I forgot what it was.
I did too. I'm just listening. I got to be careful with these interviews because I'm with everybody else. I'm just like, yeah, that's good. And I forget what I'm doing too. But I guess that means that's how good it is. You got me lost in it, man. That's a good story. We were talking about just the loneliness and how you would deal with, it's going to the other side. I know the other end of the spectrum. I know you mentioned having someone come up to you one time and they said their statement was, well, at least you got another kid.
Yeah. Don't ever say that.
No.
It don't matter how many kids you got. You don't want to lose any of them.
That's right.
But that was actually an aunt that said that to me. And, it was so unnecessary and uncalled for. But we just decided she was crazy and we let it go. Yeah. But God has a way of dealing with us. And when we're going through these situations, these circumstances, and these periods of our life that we have a hard time overcoming, the prayers of the saints around us are the most important thing. And those are what get us through. When somebody says they're praying for you, let them pray. My dad used to have a saying, and my dad was a little rough around the edges. He'd say, well, you need the prayer, or I need the prayer, and you need to practice.
Sure. I know what we're talking about here, though, is so important, just being there. Lindsay and I have been through some dark nights of the soul, dark seasons, and the people that made the most impact were the ones that were just like, I don't have all the answers, but I'm getting on a plane and flying to you right now, or I'm getting in the car and driving to you right now. It's just that old Jewish term, sitting Shiva with somebody, where you just sit. You don't try to solve all their problems. And I think it's done out of a heart of people want to help you. They want to help you. They don't want to see you go through that. And so they say something that's off the wall, and our words are so powerful. And you can't, even if it's well-meaning, you can't bring that back. And so it's so vitally important that I think that was what you just said about Greg was just the epitome of wisdom. He would wait for you to say something, and then he would just flow into that rather than trying to dominate or overwhelm the situation, even though it would have been out of a heart of caring and love. Yeah. You could really mess somebody up like that.
Well, and then when Greg did the service, my daughters had always called him Uncle G, and Madison still does. And the title of his sermon, and I don't know how many people ever remember a title of a funeral service, but his title was, "It's Okay Not to Be Okay." And he said, I don't understand any of this. But, I mean, they grew up literally calling him Uncle G from the time that they could walk. And it's one of those things where when he would, he was there for everything in their life. And now he was helping me walk through their loss.
How do you, going back and kind of revisiting some of those emotions and what you walked through in that season, you lost your marriage, you lost your daughter. How would you say that affected your relationship with God? Expound on that a little bit more, because I know we talked a little bit about it, and when you go through some trauma like that, it's kind of like your mind is just mush. It's like you said it earlier, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but you said it earlier in the first service. I was existing, I wasn't living. Like, tap into that emotion, that thought a little bit.
I mean, when you're going through a loss like that for that 5 weeks, I was existing, but I wasn't actually living. I didn't have any quality of life. I wasn't doing anything. I was going through the motions. I was getting up in the morning, going to work, coming home in the evening, and that was it. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't want to be around. And one of the parts we haven't got into is even after the Lord was working on me and healing me, and I preached at that church, and there was a time where when you come to people and you go to church and I said, "Brother, I want you to know I'm still praying for you." Well, that's great. Sometimes we don't want to be reminded every moment. And it's one extreme or the other. Does that make sense? You get to the point where you don't want people to tell you you're praying for them every time. In October of that year of 2017, I don't think I even mentioned this earlier, but I went to work for FEMA so I could get out of town. That's a true story. I thought I was going to Houston. They wound up sending me to Florida, which is wherever Uncle Sam needed me. I was willing to go. I wound up at Cocoa Beach. And
bless your heart.
And so I was on Cocoa Beach doing disaster inspections for FEMA for about 2.5, 3 weeks. And when I come back, there had been a little bit of time relapse. People had let things soften up and relax a little bit, and we had something different to talk about when I walked in the room. So it made a difference, and I was able to get through it because of the time that had lapsed there.
I'm reminded, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and there's something to be said about discernment. And when you're dealing with a situation like that, somebody who's going through something like that, just wait to hear the voice of the Lord, or wait until they give you the invitation to step into that moment with Him. We think we're the fixers and we got to step in and fix it. And we just need to be, more than anything, discerning, gracious, patient, bearing the fruit of the Spirit in those moments. Because like you said, some of it's a fine line. It's well-meaning. "Oh, brother, I'm praying for you." And depending on where they're at in their whole process of things, you could say that to them one moment and they could be like, "Oh, thank you so much." You could say it to them the next day and they'd be like, "I don't even know if God's real, and I don't even like you right now, and get away from it." It's like there's just this range of emotion. So you've got to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and very discerning about where that person is at, I feel like.
And that's very important. The range of emotions that people are going through during the time of loss is from anger to bitterness to sadness to back to anger. And anger is, depending on how they deal with anger, it can erupt. And you may see an eruption of anger because it's just such a volatile situation for people at that time. And a lot of times people just sit and cry because they don't know what else to do.
I like what you said about it's okay not to be okay. There are people who go through that I feel like you said, when you're sitting on this lawnmower in the front yard, that day, and, you just didn't want to go to church because you felt like, you just didn't, that moment was just too much. But I feel like sometimes people just need to hear that. It's okay if you're sitting on the lawnmower in the front yard and you don't even know if you want to go to church or not. Like, God's not afraid of those moments. He's big enough to invade those moments. And we put God in this Sunday morning box. And the problem with that is, if he don't, when life happens and it don't fit into that Sunday morning box or that Sunday school box or whatever it is, when it's outside of that, when we're dealing with things that are outside of all of that, it can really, truly test us. And what I've found in my life is that God doesn't run away from those moments. He engages those moments with us. And he gives us the space that we need to be angry, to go through the range of emotions. I know you mentioned some of that. We're just getting kind of the surface of your story in the sense of that moment under that big tree in the backyard. God spoke to you something that healed your heart. But there was a season up to that to where it's just kind of like, God, why? I don't even know if you're real. I don't even know. And I feel like people sometimes need to hear testimonies like this just to know that you're not weird, you're not out of line, you're not out of place. God is big enough to walk through that moment with you and allow you the grace. Thank God for grace. Amen. That he allows you to operate through that moment to say the things that you need to say. It's kind of like, say it anyway. He knows what you're thinking, It's kind of like, I love your boldness in the prayer just to say, Father, if you don't do something now, I'm walking away from it. Like, that's how I feel. God doesn't run from those emotions.
And that's, in everything that I went through, it was always my decision to stay in relationship with him. Mm-hmm. The desire to walk away was there. The reason to walk away was there. But the desire to stay in a quiet, right relationship with Christ was what I turned back to. I wanted to continue to stay in relationship with him. And I'm going to jump ahead to the next question. We had a list of questions we were trying to make sure we got through, but
we're not really sticking to them.
No, not at all. It's
all good.
But Acts 13:22, it says, and he removed Saul and he installed David as the king. And it says, the man after my own heart that was willing to do my will. And when I was a teenager in high school, I prayed that prayer. And I said, God, I want to live my life to where that I can be someone that is a man chasing after your heart and willing to do your will. But I did not understand that to continue to grow the way that David continued to grow, I had to go through the things that David went through. And that's the way that things happen in our lives. Now, I'm no David, don't get me wrong. But to continue to grow, you have to have trials. And those trials are what refine us and make us who we are and make us what we become. And because of that, we wind up going through things that we never thought we'd go through. I never dreamed I would lose a child. I never dreamed I would go through a divorce. As a preacher, we don't plan those situations out. Those are things that we don't think about that'll ever happen. That won't happen to me. Those are things that we can't control sometimes. And I mean, when Taylor was killed in the car accident, you talk about spinning your life into a complete tailspin, and you don't even know which way to look up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to grow into that, and to continue to love Christ no matter what comes at us is a testimony that when you go through a trial, you grow from it, then by all means, let God grow you to what you need to be.
Mm-hmm. And you know this as well as I do, being in ministry as long as we have, you see people who, they react one of two ways from things like this. And we've seen it, in pastors, we're all susceptible to these different trials. The Lord told us you're going to have trials and tribulations in this life. But you see people go one of two ways. They either walk away from God or they walk into God. And that process, what I found walking into God, is still messy. It's not, put a bow on it and everything's clean and, pretty, and it's messy. It's God, I need you to show up right now or I'm walking away. It's God, why would you allow this to happen to me? God, why would you do this to me? It's that kind of stuff. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not walking into God. The danger, I feel like, and that was the difference between, I felt like, that was the difference between the Apostle Peter and Judas. They both had made the same mistakes. They were both walking through the tribulation of a lifetime. But Peter failed forward, and he walked into the grace of God, where Judas was just like, I don't get it, don't understand it, don't know why, and he ends up committing suicide through all of it. You know, I feel like this is such an important message for the people of God today, because darkness is so prevalent. Suicide, depression, all these things are so prevalent. And what will happen is somebody walks through a trial, and because they don't process it right, you know, they're popping pills and they're going deeper and darker into this depressive place, eventually where they end up, you know, sometimes
they let Satan defeat them.
Yeah.
And because of that, they lose the battle. Instead of walking into and growing from it, they miss the point of the trial. And the trial pulls them back instead of pushes them forward. And you, the analogy there with Peter and Judas was perfect, because they both had the same opportunities. They both saw the same miracles. They both seen God do the same things. But one of them grew from it, and the other one withdrew from it. And because of that, we have to learn from the trials. And the things that would come across us in our lives are something that we can grow from or withdraw from.
Man, that's so good. I feel like I could sit and talk about this for a long time. Believe it or not, we've ran out of time. I want to ask Pastor David, if you would come, and I want to pray for people this morning. And listen, you can reach out if you're somebody who's suffering from loss. You can reach out to Shawn and Nisa. I know they'd love the opportunity to connect with you, minister to you. If you're watching online, feel free to share this testimony with as many people as you possibly can. In the house, do the same thing. Go and share this with somebody who's suffering through loss. But you know, you mentioned it. One of the best things we can do for people who are going through something like this is just to pray for them. And so that's what we want to do right now. I want to ask Brother Shawn, if you and Nisa would come. Our prayer team, I want to invite you to come and just find your place here in the altar area. And I want to ask everybody in the place to stand. If you're able to do so, stand with us. And what we're going to do right now is we're just going to have some time to worship God, to try to connect with the Holy Spirit. And if you're in this place today and you've suffered through loss, and it's not a scar, it hasn't been healed, it's an open wound, and you don't know what to do with it, listen, you don't have to have all the answers right now. But what you need to do is trust the sovereignty of God in this moment. Trust the love of God, that He still loves you. He cares for you. He don't want you to suffer through this alone. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to worship. But before we do, we're going to pray. Before we do all of that, I want you to bow and I want you to search your own heart today. I want to ask two questions. First of all, I want to ask, is there somebody in this place today you're suffering from the loss? It's either the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, the loss of a marriage. It's still festering. It's still real. You're still going through it. You've lost something in your life, and it's an open wound. And you'd like to acknowledge that this message spoke to you today, and have just acknowledge it before God and have us pray for you. If that's you, would you lift your hand around the place? Lift it up and keep it up. If there's people in the room, I see, man, there's hands all over the place. Now I want to ask if those of you would put your hand back down. If there's people in here today who you know somebody who's suffering through loss in your life, I want you to lift your hand. You know somebody who's suffering through loss. Hands all over the place. So what we're going to do is we're going to worship. We're going to lift these needs to God. And what I want to do is, if you lifted your hand for either one of those and you'd like for somebody to pray with you, Shawn and Nisa's here to pray for you. I'm telling you, there's an anointing resting on this couple because of the brokenness they've been through. And there's people that are in this altar. I'm looking around. There are people in this altar. They've been through brokenness. And there's an anointing on their life to be able to pray with you. So if you need prayer right now, I want to invite you to come and find somebody in this altar to pray with you. Right now, if you lifted your hand and you need somebody to pray with you, I want to invite you to come. Everybody else, let's just begin to worship across the building. Let's begin to seek the face of God right now. Come on, let's worship together.